Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here tonight. Thank you for your welcome applause. I'm very curious, do me a favor guys, who among you don't like science fiction? Is there people here who don't like science fiction? All right, yeah, that's usually what I get. Like I told my mother a couple of years ago that I was teaching science fiction at university, and she looked at my dad and she asked, what did we do wrong with the education? There was obviously something very wrong with me teaching science fiction. I also do other things. I also work and research and teach propaganda and public relations and public diplomacy. And sometimes it's hard for people to understand what they have in common. They have something in common. It's the principle of stories, stories that can inspire people. Tonight I'm here to explain to you why science fiction matters, but first I'm going to explain to you what science fiction is. Very Star Trek effect. What is science fiction? Well, science fiction is not about predicting the future. The future doesn't exist. Science fiction is here to prevent and invent the future. Prevent and invent the future. Preventing the future in the sense that science fiction can tell us the danger that future holds for us, but it can also help us invent the future and make sure that the future is without those dangers that I was talking about. Preventing, inventing the future, not predicting. The central question in science fiction is the following. What if? It's a very simple question, but it's very hard and very complex to answer. What if? What if, for instance, we could fly to the moon? What if one day we'd meet an alien race? What if? And some societies are able to ask the question, what if? Some societies cannot ask the question. Same for individuals. In science fiction, what if is the most important question. Science fiction started at the end of the 19th century. Two important people here, two important people. The first one is H.G. Wells. He's a British writer. Among other things, he wrote The Shape of Things to Come, probably my favorite. The other one is Jules Verne. He's French. They never met, and yet at the end of the 19th century, they invented something called science fiction. Why? They never met, ever. Jules Verne and H.G. Wells never met. Now in history, when we don't really know how to explain certain coincidence, we use the term Zeitgeist, spirit of the time. We borrow from German sometimes. And Zeitgeist means that, well, we don't know why, but we can explain that it had to happen at this time. It had to happen because at the end of the 19th century, humanity is starting to gain a new faith in technology. Philosophy and religion were sort of getting old. The new ideologies, fascism and communism, were still a bit young. The humanity had this belief that maybe one day technology and science could save us. I mentioned that Jules Verne is French and that H.G. Wells is British, and this is no coincidence. It's no coincidence because before the First World War, you have two main empires, the French one and the British one. The fact that Verne is French and that H.G. Wells is British come also from the fact that those two empires are going to bring civilization to the rest of the world. Those two nations, those two empires, will be so powerful that will also be able to decide for the future of humanity. I'm saying this because it's important to understand that science fiction wasn't born in France and Great Britain by mistake. It's not a coincidence. Thing is, after the end of the First War, those two empires crumbled down, and after the Second World War this time, two new empires emerged, namely Soviet Union and United States. And once again, it's no coincidence to see that science fiction was extremely strong in both USSR and United States after the Second World War. Now, after the end of the Cold War, today, there is only one country that is truly leading the world in terms of science fiction, in producing movies, in having writers in science fiction, and it's the United States. Another fact I would like to mention, speaking about future, is that those two empires maybe were producing a lot of science fiction, but if you look at Nazi Germany, in Nazi Germany, movies were extremely important to control society. The Nazis produced more than 1,000 movies, and out of those 1,000 movies, 1,100 movies exactly, not one science fiction movie was ever produced by Nazi Germany. And we know the fate of this empire. Now, this is what science fiction is about, preventing, inventing the future. Now, why science fiction is important, I'm going to tell you here with three keywords: innovation, profitability, and smart power. I know that usually science fiction is considered to be something mostly for nerds who are living in the basement of their mom, Maybe you're watching The Big Bang Theory, terrible TV show about science fiction, I'm afraid. So usually science fiction is not really perceived well, like I said before, but science fiction can be extremely important in a society. Well, first of all, science fiction has the power of liberating imagination. Somebody said, maybe Einstein, that imagination is more important than knowledge. Imagination is crucial, especially in science fiction, because if you imagine something, then maybe you have the power to make it come true. If you imagine something, then maybe it will come true later. That's the power of imagination. The first innovation I would like to mention is the robot. Now, robots have been an idea for quite some time, especially in Europe. The idea that you can have something not made of flesh, but made of made of chemical components could actually replace humans. But the first one to actually give robots their name is Karel Čapek in the Czech Republic. Karel Čapek in 1920 coined the term robots, which means servants or slave in Czech. And he was the first one to consider that maybe one day the robots will help us, that maybe one day they will save humankind in the sense that they will replace us, but for the greater good. Another science fiction writer developed the concept of robotics, and it's Isaac Asimov. This guy is probably the closest you can find of a genius in science fiction. He was a professor at university. Doesn't qualify him to be a genius, but he wrote more than 500 books on pretty much all the subjects. And he's mostly well known for his trilogy about the robots. And in this trilogy, Asimov is developing the 3 laws of robotics, explaining the interaction between robots and humans. And I put here the little Honda robot because I also want to emphasize on the fact that Karel Čapek invented the term robot, Asimov invented the laws of robotics. And today, in pretty much all universities or places where people research robotics, those laws written by science fiction writers are still used. Now, innovation, the tablet. Many of you guys are using a tablet. And the concept actually comes from a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in 1979. It didn't look like an iPad yet, but it was a book that supposedly contained all the knowledge of the universe. All the knowledge of the universe in 1979. In 2010, we have the iPad. Once again, if you can imagine it, then maybe you can make it. You can make it happen, you can invent the future. Another example for the Trekkies, the smartphone. Now, Star Trek, I don't know if you're familiar with Star Trek, but they're always using some kind of smartphone to communicate between Spock, Kirk, the Enterprise, and whatnot. And they were the first one to use the smartphone, but the communication function. What's also interesting, as you can see on this image here, is that they also use their smartphone to monitor the health of aliens, or also of the member of the crew of the Enterprise. And a few weeks ago, Samsung released this first smartphone, which you can use to communicate, but also to monitor your own health. Once again, if you can imagine it, maybe it will happen. Now, why is science fiction profitable? Science fiction is very profitable. Here you can see Will Smith. You probably know Will Smith. You remember that he was a rapper, and then he was in a TV show, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And at one point, just like many rappers, he wanted to be a serious actor, like Justin Timberlake. And so he studied Hollywood. He studied Hollywood and actually discovered that the most profitable movies in Hollywood are science fiction movies. I put here the list of the 15 most profitable movies of Hollywood. Well, actually, the 15 most profitable movies of all time. And if you got them, I put in white, I put the science fiction movie. Half of the 15 movies are science fiction, the other half is fantasy. Only 2 movies will be considered normal, Titanic and Skyfall, which is honestly more science fiction than real life. So Will Smith studied Hollywood, discovered that if you wanted to be a bankable actor, you had to perform in science fiction movies, and that's why he gave us beautiful movies like After Earth recently. Now, smart power. Smart power, the idea that sometimes you can combine hard power and soft power together for governance. This is the story of the real Star Wars. Probably seen Star Wars in 1977 when the movie was released. It was a huge hit, to say the least. And it was such a huge hit that everybody was talking about Star Wars. And there was a convention of science fiction writers that took place. And one of them said, these are his words, he said, wouldn't it be cool to have like a real Star Wars? And when he said that, everybody around him was like, yeah, dude, that would be totally cool. But one person was very interested by what he had to say. And this person was the assistant of Ronald Reagan. He came back, spoke to Reagan, you know Reagan, ex-actor, very good in communication, understand the power of a good story to inspire people. And Reagan gave in '83 the Star Wars speech, when he explained that now America had to win the race to space, the other race to space. They got beaten by the Russians once, it will not happen again. And the idea of Star Wars, of the real Star Wars, was called the Strategic Defense Initiative. The Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars, was simple. The Americans would put lasers in the sky in order to intercept Russian missiles. They poured billions of dollars to research the possibility of using lasers to destroy the missiles before they will be destroyed. The thing is, the story is half true and half wrong as usual, in the sense that they invested, they researched the real Star Wars. But their research never became conclusive. On the other hand, the Soviets heard about the SDI, and they had to beat the Americans once again on the race to space. So they also poured billions and billions of dollars researching their own SDI, except they didn't have those billions and billions of dollars. Now, Star Wars is not what ended the Cold War, but probably it contributed to the end of Cold War. That's also the power of science fiction. It's profitable, it's innovative, and when it comes to governance, it's also something extremely important for governments. It inspires people about their future. Now, one country that is quite challenged when it comes to science fiction is the Netherlands. I did some research, and it seems that in the Netherlands you have 1 or 2 movies about science fiction. Of all the movies that the Dutch produce, only 2 movies regard science fiction, and only 7 science fiction writers in the Netherlands. Now, don't get me wrong, my Dutch friends. I'm not saying that the Netherlands is bad or it's a bad brand, quite the opposite. See, I put a picture of the medals, of the Dutch medals, because I was very impressed. And I truly believe that the Netherlands is a great brand. And I'm not the only one who thinks that the Netherlands is a great brand. I put here a few rankings. One that I'm extremely proud of is that the Netherlands is the 3rd best country in the world when it comes to higher education. Number 1, the United States. Number 2, United Kingdom. Number 3, the Netherlands. But the thing is, the Netherlands is a small country. I would say, so far, so good. Very good rankings, everything is peachy, everything is fine. But when it comes to the future, you have more and more challenge. First of all, the Netherlands is a small country. Small country. It's challenged by many things. Doesn't have natural resources. The population is aging. So the Netherlands has more and more challenges in the future. Maybe we don't feel them right now. Maybe everything is great because we also get so many gold medals. But in the future, maybe the Netherlands would be at stake. So tonight, I have a modest proposal for the Dutch government. And this is my proposal. Speaking about science fiction in the Netherlands, you know that the public and the private sectors work together. They do work together, and it's doing pretty well. So my modest proposal when it comes to science fiction would be that the Dutch government would initiate science fiction initiatives, encouraging the study of science fiction, encouraging the writing of science fiction, encouraging more science fiction and also more interaction between people who imagine science fiction and people who are able to turn science fiction into true objects, true artifacts, and pave the way to the future. Science fiction is something quite serious. Science fiction is something that also helps us, again, invent the future. Wouldn't it be fantastic to see that the Netherlands, this small, tiny country in Europe, would be actually, instead of being a follower, would become a world leader. This thanks to science fiction. Now, this is my talk for tonight. This is why science fiction matters. I hope that you enjoy it. I'm Etienne Auge, and I will be seeing you in the future. Thank you very much.